It's Wednesday, it's 11:15 and we're live in Westminster. Joining me today, the Conservative MP, Jake Berry, Labour MP, Emma Hardy, former Conservative government advisor Mo Hussein, and Yahoo's UK political correspondent Nadine Batchelor-Hunt. Today, rail unions defend a week of rail strikes after the government calls them selfish.
This government are experts at being selfish and irresponsible. Our members have had enough.
After Monday night's vote, pressure from Tory MPs to cut taxes. Boris Johnson will be in the Commons for the first time since that vote for Prime Minister's Questions. We'll bring you it live at noon. The Health Secretary says the NHS is a blockbuster service in a Netflix age. Is this what he means?
We've currently got 170 patients in the department. That's 170, quite a few. Our current wait time for a doctor is 7.5 hours.
Let's start with those rail strikes proposed for later on this month, set to involve tens of thousands of rail workers, which will cause major disruption. This is the front page of the Daily Mail. Hard left rail union strike to paralyse Britain. Downing Street, as you heard in the headlines, have called the strikes extremely selfish. Do you agree, Jake?
Well, I do. I mean, there will be hundreds of mums and dads, people with hospital appointments who can't, get to where they need to be because the rail unions are striking. Actually, only yesterday, or Monday, we saw Keir Starmer fail to condemn the tube strike here in London, which caused huge disruption. And I hope that Keir Starmer will join the government in saying this is simply the wrong thing to do, and there is another way. People are free to register that they are unhappy with their pay offer, but in other countries, they simply open the railway lines and let people travel for free, rather than ruining all our lives and stopping us sort of getting to school. If you've got a protest, fine, run the rails for free, but don't just destroy people's ability to get round.
Are they being selfish, Emma?
No, I don't actually think that they are. We have a major cost of living crisis. We have working people struggling to make ends meet. Trade unions exist to defend the paying conditions and support working people. I mean, that's why they are created. They have a huge mandate for this. What I would like to see is the government, instead of just, calling names, calling them selfish and trying to have another fight with them, actually sitting down and listening to them, listen to what they're saying. 2,500 maintenance workers, jobs at risk, 1,000 jobs in ticketing offices, jobs at risk. This isn't just about London and the tube strike. This is about rail workers working from Hull, working in my area. They're not on huge amounts of pay. If the government was doing some grown-up politics, what they'd do is sit down, have a conversation and work this out.
So you support the strike?
I think they have a mandate to strike. Yes, they have. The government changed the rules for trade unions in 2015. They had an 89% vote and over 70% turnout for the ballot. Unions exist to support the paying conditions of working people. Unions are doing their job. The government need to do theirs and actually have a grown-up conversation with them.
Are they being selfish, the unions?
I think so, yes. The scale of disruption that we're going to see, and Emma talks rightly about the cost of living crisis, but this will affect people who are just trying to get to work, trying to get on with their day-to-day lives, who are impacted by the cost of living crisis. It's happening at a time where we have the first COVID-free summer in 3 years, where people want to get together, whether it's sporting events, music festivals, so the timing of this. And also, there are still a few weeks left. The answer, of course, is getting people around the table, coming to an agreement. Yeah. But dangling this as a threat at a time when people are really struggling, I don't think is the right thing to do.
I mean, this is how it works, though, with unions, right? Like, workers have to kind of make some sort of tangible threat to get change. And I think, there is a cost of living crisis at the moment. If people are facing being made redundant, losing their jobs, and also aren't getting the pay rises in line with inflation, then I think, it's completely understandable for them to say, we need to have these pay rises and not lose our jobs.
Would you accept there is another way? I mean, they could just say, they could open the barriers and say, look, everyone travels for free, stop disrupting people's lives. It's deeply, deeply irresponsible. We have an economy that is in a very difficult shape. We're stopping people going to work. We're stopping people making hospital appointments. And I just think it's really, really irresponsible. I actually ultimately think it will backfire, because I think trade unions and people working in our public services have huge amounts of respect for the public, quite rightly. But I think when you inflict this sort of disruption on people every day,
inevitable.
It's
not inevitable that there will be a strike. If the government are serious about negotiating with them, then they can stop having the strike. I mean, this is all put on, it's the union's job to what? It's the union's job to look after the terms and conditions and the pay of its workers.
Is negotiation with a gun to your head ever a proper negotiation? I'm not quite sure.
Yeah, but you've got a government, calling them names on a front page of a newspaper. I mean, it's pathetic and it's childish. They need to be grown up about this, sit down and actually talk and listen to them.
I think we'll have to agree to disagree because you and your party supports the strike.
I support working people who are struggling right now. I support people who are struggling with the cost of living. I support people who are struggling to make ends meet. I support the 2,500 jobs that are at risk and the over 1,000 jobs that are at risk in ticketing offices. I support the train guard that I was talking to on my journey home the other week. He was telling me about having 4 children on 80% furlough, how difficult he's found the cost of living and how he reluctantly voted for this because he felt frustrated that the government weren't listening to him when he was asking for a simple pay rise. These are working people who are struggling that the government claim to support working people. Well, they need to put the money where their mouth is, sit down with the union, sort this out and negotiate properly.
You are talking about the people that will be prevented from going to work, quite rightly, Jake, but isn't that the impetus then for the government to try and bring this to some sort of resolution?
Well, I hope the government will bring this to a resolution. There is an opportunity to do that. But £16 billion of taxpayers' cash goes into subsidising the railways every single year. Taxpayers pay for that. There isn't some endless sort of, bucket of money, although maybe people feel there is now over COVID.
Obviously there was.
There isn't some endless bucket of money. And, the cost of living crisis affects everyone. Once you start putting wages up across the public sector, that increases inflation, that impacts on everyone's basket of shopping that they might buy at any well-known supermarket. It's quite responsible for the government to say, actually, there has to be some pay restraint within the public sector, while at the same time being absolutely cognizant of the pressures people are under.
Just briefly and finally, go on.
No, I'm just saying, but on the terms of pay rise, it always frustrates me so much that we talk about pay constraint on those people who are on average and low incomes and never pay constraint on the top.
Is everyone on a low income who works for the railways? Because there certainly are statistics that state that people who drive the trains are on quite good wages and quite good salaries. Something really between there is a range, but they could be on anything between sort of 40, 50 up to 70, 80.
Yeah, and if you look again, and this is where we have the London-centric conversation, which is always quite frustrating. I'm sure Jake will agree with me on that. That when you look at the salaries, when you look at the salaries outside of London, you're talking between 20,000 plus salaries for many of the people working as train guards and working in the rail. They're not huge incomes. So when you look at an average, obviously people tend to earn more in London. We know, and we know that's the case. But these aren't all hugely well-paid people.
They're not a job creation scheme. They are about enabling people to move around our country.
All right, we're going to
subsidise them.
And as I say,
if
we want grown-up politics and we want the government to act in a sensible way, they need to negotiate with the unions. These strikes are not inevitable. There is a chance for them to be called off if they can have a proper negotiation. I support working people and always will.
It's been a busy 48 hours. You may remember on Monday the vote of confidence in the Prime Minister Boris Johnson. He survived that vote, but now the Prime Minister is coming under some pressure to take action on the issue of tax. Let's have a look at this headline in the Times newspaper. Cut taxes if you want to survive. Prime Minister is urged. Are you urging him to do that?
Well, yes, I am actually. I think we have too high a tax burden in this country. And I think as Conservative-minded people or even Conservative members of Parliament, it's not enough to simply talk about being the low-tax party. My now dead mother used to say to me, handsome is as handsome does. And I think the time has come to stop talking about cutting taxes and start doing it. And the reason I really, really believe that is there is no more important time than when people are struggling with the cost of living to put money back in people's pockets. And the best and most direct way the government can do that is allowing us all to keep more of our own money in the first place. And that's what I hope the Prime Minister will be addressing.
And would you cut elsewhere? I mean, would you cut spending then in order to do that?
Well, look, we've shown time and time again that when you cut taxes, in fact, we saw with the stamp duty tax cuts during COVID, that when you cut taxes, the amount of revenue the government receives often goes up. It's always a fine balancing act, but I do think there is things we can do. I particularly and personally would like the government to look at VAT, because the people on lowest wages pay the biggest proportion of their income out in VAT. And I think now we've left the European Union, we have the freedom to have flexibility in VAT, the government should absolutely look at that.
All right, well, let's talk to Morgan Schondelmeyer from the free market think tank, the Adam Smith Institute. Welcome to you, Morgan. According to the Institute, Tax Freedom Day, I think, is tomorrow. Is that right? What does it mean?
It's actually today, June 8th. Yeah, so every year the Adam Smith Institute calculates the day that the average taxpayer has to work until in order to pay off their yearly tax bill. So we calculate net national income and the total tax take, and through that find that the average taxpayer works up until yesterday to pay off their yearly tax bill. From today, they can start earning for themselves.
I see. Well, that's something to look forward to then, obviously, after that. In terms of people's taxes, you may have just heard Jake Berry say that actually the government needs to act and become the low or lower taxation party. At the moment, how does it look?
You say something to celebrate, and absolutely it normally is, but today is Tax Freedom Day, and last year Tax Freedom Day was May 31st. So we've jumped an entire week later into the year in just 1 year. Normally you see Tax Freedom Day move by 1 or 2 days either side. So to have a jump of a week shows that we're having a really unprecedented tax burden on the average taxpayer. So we do need to take action, and take action quite quickly, because our projections using OBR data show that if we don't act, Tax Freedom Day will come on June 23rd. By 2026, which is even later in the year, and it's hard to believe that we would have a tax burden that high in our country.
Well, how do you feel about that, Jake?
Well, I mean, seeing it tip past the longest day is, I think, really interesting. But
interesting?
Well, depressing, actually, frankly. Interestingly depressing. But, you know, we have been for an unprecedented time with record public spending. It was absolutely right that when people were going to lose their homes, lose their jobs, unable to feed their kids because of COVID, that the government stepped in. We all understand that that has to be paid for. My own personal view is that should be paid for over a much longer period, because it's a once, thankfully, in a 100-year event, historically has been. But I just think there's so much pressure on families and their budgets. Let's not have, well, I support £400 coming back on your gas bill. That's a good idea, isn't it? But actually, let me keep that £400 in the first place, and I'll choose to spend it on what I want. I might pay my gas bill, but I might prioritise taking my children away for the weekend. I might prioritise buying food or supporting a relative who's having difficult times. It's this sort of slightly creepy mission creep that we've seen from the state over COVID.
From the government.
Where, from the government, where it sort of feels it's sort of involved in all parts of your life. I'm a libertarian. I just think, step back, get out my life, let me keep more of my own money, and then I'll choose what I want to spend it on.
Right, well, I'll just get Morgan's response and then I'll come to you, Emma. What do you think of that, Morgan?
I think that's exactly right. So one of the things that we discussed at the Adam Smith Institute is you're not going to be able to tax your way out of this COVID debt we've incurred. But also I think it's a worrying trend that we're seeing with this government, that they've indicated they're committed to spending a lot of money, and that is taxpayer money at the end of the day. And so I think that in addition to what we're hearing about maybe bringing forward the income tax cut, we need to look at things like scrapping the rise in corporation tax and looking at things like that. Tax Freedom Day calculates direct taxes like income tax, but also indirect taxes. So taxes on sugary foods or alcoholic drinks, corporation tax. The tax burden is so high that we just need to make sure that we're allowing people to keep more of their own money in their pockets. And that is really what's going to help with the cost of living crisis, is allowing people to spend their own money in the way that they see fit.
Well, there's been a lot of criticism from Labour about that national insurance rise. Do you agree with what Morgan and Jake are saying? Let's have lower personal taxation, let people scrap the corporation tax, let's take taxes off things like sugary foods. Is that what you'd like to see?
I think we're going to use phrases for mums today, Jake, aren't we? Because my mum would say, you are what you do, not what you say you'll do. And I think Jake's quite right. There's great wisdom in mothers. Always wisdom in mothers. But I think you're right in the fact that we've talked, you know, the government talks about being low tax. It's not a low tax government. It's the highest taxes of all time. And what I really want to highlight as well is the money that is wasted. And I think that's what people find the most difficult to swallow, is we're talking about having all this money taken away from them from tax. And if it was going to things like really good public services or you know, really good education systems, something like that.
Well, that's what they say, the national insurance rise, they being the Conservatives in the government, that it's going to go for the pandemic recovery and social care.
What we're actually seeing, and I hope Jock Jake will be as shocked as I was about this, was the amount of money wasted in tax fraud at the moment. We have every year the DWP issue the estimated amount of benefit fraud to the country. HMRC don't issue an estimate of any of the tax fraud that's actually happening in this country. And we know that every pound spent on regaining tax that's defrauded means we get £18 back to the Treasury. It's 18 times as much, whereas if it's benefit fraud, it's 6 times as much.
Everybody would like to cut waste, Emma, but in terms of actual action... No, I mean, but every government, really, sitting here, every single politician says they want to cut waste. But in terms of tangible action, would Labour reverse, if they were in government, the increase in NICs?
We wouldn't have introduced it to start.
No, I know that, but would you reverse it?
Well, we don't. When the time we get to government, and I'm sure it will be after the next general election. Well, how do we know what state the situation's country is going to be in right now?
You could make a principal point here and now.
Would do right now, and that's we wouldn't be wasting as much money. We wouldn't be spending 660 million giving people who own 2 homes extra money for their bills. We wouldn't be allowing so much money to go unclaimed in tax fraud and in tax waste. That's what we wouldn't be doing. We wouldn't allow £11 billion of money to be wasted. And Lord Agnew resigning over the fact that all this money has been wasted by this government. This government seems to be taking an awful lot of people's money and then spaffing it around on things that don't seem to bring any tangible benefit.
Right. Well, you work for a Conservative government. Is there room for the sorts of tax cuts that Jake is talking about, that Morgan is talking about, when we have got COVID to pay for and a cost of living crisis to mitigate?
I think it's difficult to see that happening in the short to medium term. There's definitely a disconnect between the government rhetoric on this in terms of lowering taxes and what's happening in reality. But actually, the pandemic precedent is quite important here as well. In the pandemic, rightly, in my view, the government intervened a lot, pulled out many rabbits, had to many hats, and showed people it can help. The taxpayer can be the first port of call. And actually, we say now we want to go back to lower tax and less intervention, but look at what the government has been doing. Look at the windfall tax on oil and gas companies. People still expect that help to be there. And I think it's difficult, once you've done it, the genie's out the bottle, to put it back in. So there's 2 competing factors on the government on this.
Do you agree with that latter point, that actually people have got used to a bigger state and government intervention, partly because, or maybe wholly because of the pandemic, and they'd like it to stay that way? Where are you?
I think it's difficult, but in the short term, with the cost of living crisis, rising inflation, the Bank of England warning of a recession, I think it's inevitable that the government are going to have to be a bigger presence in people's lives. When it comes to taxation, I think the government need to be transparent on how they're going to pay for tax cuts. Is it going to be borrowing? Is it going to be austerity? We know that austerity was absolutely devastating for people who right now will be worst affected by the cost of living crisis. So, you know, there's a lot of rhetoric flying around, but we need to think about the real-time consequences. And I'd add, you know, investing in public services, as much as you know, there are some that criticise it. Recently, economists have said there's a lot of inactive workers post-COVID because of long COVID. If we don't have a strong public services like the NHS, then we're going to have economic inactivity. If we don't have strong schools, then we won't have people with the skills to go and build the economy for the future. So I think it's important not to see it from a short-term point of view, with these tax cuts, flirting with these tax cuts, despite taxes going up, and thinking about the future of the economy long-term, which does rely on strong public services. It just does.
Well, I mean, public services require economic growth because, you know, taxpayers have to go out, earn the money, pay the taxes to pay for them. And that's where I think the government's sort of trump card could be, that in fact, as a government, we
just
need
been downgraded, by the way, the UK's economic growth, probably with other countries
economy in the G7 that is putting up taxes, and we're also the slowest growing economy and have just been downgraded. So isn't that funny? When you put taxes up, your economic growth falls back. That's pretty sensical to me, and that's why I think this is the time that the government should look at cutting taxes, because there is no way we can cut our way out of the COVID debt. There's no way we can borrow our way out of the COVID debt. We have to grow the economy. And that's what Conservatives have always believed, and that's what we need to do.
Isn't it?
But to be clear, you're saying it's the government's fault of raising taxes that has led to lower growth?
Well, causation is not the same as correlation, but I'm just saying that, to me, that goes off like a klaxon in my head. Right. I do not think, at a time of economic challenges that we face, I do not think it's the right time to increase taxes on ordinary working people or even on business. I think it's counterproductive. I think your economy will shrink because of it, and that will put all of those public services that people rely on in jeopardy.
Yeah, I think it's a bit short-sighted to suggest that it's just taxes that is causing low growth. You know, we have just left the European Union. right, that's going to have an impact on our economy. In France, they're seeing energy prices go up by about, I think it's 4 or 5% the last time I checked. We're seeing it go up 54%, and it could go up to, the energy price cap could go up to 2,800 in October. So the idea that it's just tax rises and not government policy that is impacting this, I just don't think holds water. I understand your point there, but there are broader factors to bring in, and I know that things like Brexit are controversial, but the idea it hasn't had an impact.
Only for years.
Hasn't had an impact on the economy, regardless of how you voted. I don't have strong views either way. Regardless of how you voted, it has had an impact on the economy.
Well, the official figures say that.
But the energy point's really interesting, isn't it? Because France, the reason I read that they have such a low increase in energy prices is their reliance on nuclear energy, which is the mainstay of their energy market. Successive governments, both Conservative and Labour, have failed to properly invest in our energy infrastructure. I do think actually decisions made 10, 15, 20 years ago under different political governments have to some extent seeded this crisis we face in energy.
All right,
your government's been in for 12 years, so your government has been in.
And we've shown you can't build a nuclear power station in 12 years.
Yes,
we've shown that because we still haven't beat Hinkley
and as
Point.
Jesse Norman put in his letter to the Prime Minister, the Conservative MP put in his letter to the Prime Minister, there's no point lying and pretending you can build a nuclear energy power station. I think the point about taxes is where I agree with Jake. This is absolutely the wrong time to be raising taxes. But it goes back to the point.
But what would you cut as well? You heard what Nadine said. It would result in cuts elsewhere.
This is where I say, having taxes to fund public services, I absolutely agree.
Right, so you want to cut them or raise them?
We should just stop wasting the amount of money we're wasting. £11 billion was wasted. We're not getting back the amount defrauded in this country. 660 million. I keep making that point. Going to people who have
no
two
one would
homes.
disagree with getting rid of waste.
If we want to get rid of, seriously, act on waste, and it's money that we get back. £1 invested in tax fraud, we get £18 back. Let's sort out waste all the time in this government. They're spread. It's other people's money, as Thatcher rightly said. There's no such thing as government money. This is other people's money, and they are wasting and spending other people's money. It's our money, and they are wasting it, and the government need to sort it out.
Well, that's good to see a Conservative and a Labour MP supporting...
I think we're in wild agreements.
Morgan Schondelmeyer, thank you very much for joining us. We're going to talk about levelling up, perhaps another important aspect of the economy in terms of what the government is doing. This is the Independent headline. Levelling up fund rules allow ministers to hand billions to favoured areas, MPs warn. Is that right, Jake?
Well, no, I don't think it is. And funnily enough, in the first round of levelling up, more went to areas that had a Labour council than had a Conservative council. It's not just about MPs, of course, it's about your council as well. That was reported in The Guardian last November, not a newspaper I normally read, but I checked it out before I came on today. But the truth is, the reason more money is going to areas with Conservative MPs is twofold. Number one, it's very heavily focused at towns rather than cities. Successive governments, including ones I've been involved with, have focused too much on major cities like Manchester, Leeds and Liverpool. This is now focusing on towns and smaller cities like Hull and Preston and places like that. And the second thing is, the Labour Party did so catastrophically bad at the last general election in England in just those sort of battleground seats. There are very few Labour MPs there left to go. Emma, you've had 19.6 million, I think, from levelling up fund to the city of Hull.
And we had over 200 million taken away from our local authority.
But there's just not that many of them, because it was the battleground of the last election, and people in their droves went out and bought into this vision of levelling up. And areas like I represent and Emma represent, for the first time in a generation, are getting support from government.
But you shouldn't be complaining about anything. I mean, Jake is right. Your area, your constituency and region got an awful lot of money, around £19 million. Blackburn, Jake's constituency, didn't get anything.
Well, I mean, what a shock that this report shows that Boris Johnson acts in the interest of Boris Johnson. I mean, that will surprise us all. I think when it
by giving money
This is the thing that really frustrates me with all of this. This is about centralisation of control. This is about power being decided by number 10. This is about centralising power into the office of the Prime Minister. And I would have thought
Are you not pleased to have got that money?
Well,
he gives 20 million, but he takes from us over 200 million. We've had local authority cuts of over £200 million. And that money, if it had gone to the local authority, hadn't been cut, then the whole local authority could could have decided exactly where it wanted to spend its money, on who, and in what instance.
But
let me
it
finish.
did decide, the criteria.
Have you read the criteria for the Levelling Up Fund? When you actually look at the criteria, it's very stipulated on what you're allowed to spend it on, what you're not allowed to spend it on, and then the decision is made by number 10. Instead of that money being given to the local authority and other local authorities around the country, and allowing those people to make decisions.
You were on Hull's Levelling Up Board. Did you not support what they proposed?
I also support any bit of money that the government, any crumbs they want to throw us. But what I want, though, is I want proper power being given to areas like Hull. I want them to be funded properly so they can make the decisions that make a difference in their community. I don't want every decision about money Hull gets or doesn't get being decided by the Prime Minister and number 10 on what whim or how he's feeling particularly that day.
Well, and Blackburn hasn't got it. I mean,
know,
that's a bit of a
Blackburn isn't my constituency. I'd be horsewhipped through the streets of Rosendale and Darwin. To say I'm from Blackburn, Rosendale and Darwin is my constituency. And we have had some money. We got Town Deal going into the town of Darwin. And you know what? Like Emma, I sat on that board. I was massively involved with my Labour councillor, I've got a brilliant working relationship with, about deciding where that money was going to go. That is actually, it's more power given to MPs than any other government spending package.
Well, let's just take another angle. Financial Times headline, London's recovery outstrips rest of UK in blow to levelling up agenda. Your reaction? Any surprise?
It's not a surprise, and I think this speaks to the challenge that the government has on this, because with the focus on the North and the Midlands, there are going to be MPs in the South who may feel like levelling up means levelling down for them. They'll be worried about a potential Lib Dem threat to their seats as well, so they'll want to see a share of the pie as well. So this news is not a surprise, but the politics will, of course, kick in. When this is your flagship policy that you've campaigned on to parts of the country that have been left behind for quite a long time, it's not then a surprise if you then come good on your promises and actually deliver that investment that people voted for. And I think on Emma's point, it's slightly tricky for Labour to push this line because effectively you're kind of saying vote Conservative and you get more money for your areas. So it's not something to particularly Labour will want to make a big thing of or push.
It devolved back to local authorities to make the decisions for local people who know their areas best.
Well, I'm just going to move off you two and your debate there, because the ONS figures, Nadine, from that article by the Financial Times show London and Northern Ireland the only regions where GDP is now above pre-pandemic levels. Does that show to you that levelling up isn't really working?
I mean, I'm from Birmingham and the public transport system there is terrible. So it doesn't really surprise me. When I come back down to London, I'm always amazed. It never gets boring to me how amazing the public transport is down here and how bad it is back home. When it comes to public spending on levelling up, I mean, I know that there are some that would argue we need to cut public spending or rein it in. The Conservatives ran on a manifesto to level up the country, which means more public spending. The fact that London is having a faster recovery than the rest of the country should really worry the Conservatives right now, and then also before the elections in 2024, I think, because even fuel poverty is terrible in the West Midlands. I think Birmingham Hodge Hill has the highest levels, as well as highest levels of universal credit claimants. These are areas that really, really need support, and they're just not seeing it from the government, unfortunately.
We're going to talk about NHS advice, because the word women has been removed from certain online NHS health advice, a move that one expert says could risk harming patients. Now, the main NHS web pages on ovarian, womb and cervical cancers suffered only by people born with female biology no longer refer to women. Let's just show you this. Ovarian cancer from February 2022. The advice says ovarian cancer mainly affects women who have been through the menopause, usually over the age of 50, but it can sometimes affect younger women. June 22, this month, anyone with ovaries can get ovarian cancer, but it mostly affects those over 50. Let's have a look at the advice for cervical cancer. August 2021, cervical cancer develops in a woman's cervix. In June 2022, cervical cancer is a cancer that's found anywhere in the cervix. Now, the Health Secretary, Sajid Javid, was asked about this morning on Times Radio, about the change in wording. This is what he had to say.
I don't support that kind of change, and I've seen these reports. I've asked to find out exactly why this is happening. Look, this is I accept that this is, when we talk about gender, of course, it's a sensitive issue. It should be approached with compassion at all times. But, as Health Secretary, it won't surprise you or your listeners to know that, I think an individual's biological sex really matters.
Jake?
Well, I'm astounded that the NHS, when we're facing such a crisis, huge waiting times, people waiting months to get operations, years in some cases, is frankly wasting its time and taxpayers' cash addressing this sort of issue. I spoke earlier about...
But do you think it's an issue that needs addressing?
Well, if you let me finish, I spoke earlier about the creep of the state into our lives. I'm a libertarian. Get out of our lives, let people define themselves as what they feel comfortable with rather than I don't need the state to tell me what I am. I know what I am, and I'm sure my wife and people in society know what they are. The idea that the NHS would waste taxpayers' money with this sort of nonsense, it's ridiculous. Concentrate on cutting your waiting times, concentrate on cutting A&E waiting times, concentrate on making people well again, stop this nonsense, move on. I think Sajid is right, we've got to get rid of it.
Nadine?
I'm struggling to see the evidence to say this could deter women. First of all, we often see with this idea of cultural differences or lack of first language to try and explain away health disparities. For example, black women are 4 times more likely to die in childbirth than white women. And often people say, oh, it might be a language barrier. When it comes to language about ovaries, cervixes, periods, if you have female sex organs, you know what an ovary is, you know what a cervix is. If you go to hospital and have a child, you're pretty clear about what happens when you give birth. So the idea that this could mean that some people don't know what affects them, I find quite condescending, and also there doesn't seem to be any empirical evidence to suggest that. But we do know before that this is off this kind of mindset of people not understanding medical advice because they come from an ethnic background or English isn't their first language, is used to try and dismiss health disparities that may be happening for other reasons, including discriminatory reasons.
Do you think it's a waste of time?
I don't think it's a waste of time. I just think it's inevitable. We're going to move to this inevitably.
Has anyone actually asked a trans individual whether they find the previous advice deeply offensive? I would be amazed if they did find it
Trans
deeply
people find language
offensive.
like that exclusionary. And I, as a woman, really don't mind if it says, if you have ovaries. If anything, it's clearer, because if you're a trans man or a non-binary person who has ovaries, it's really clear advice. I really don't feel like anybody with, female reproductive organs is going to read that and be confused.
In my opinion, you want to sack a few of the people who are coming up with this nonsense, employ a few more nurses and clear the backlog in the NHS. I just think it's ridiculous.
I don't know if you'd be able to pay someone's salary by changing something on a website. Probably takes about, 30 seconds?
They will be spending taxpayers' money on it.
Right. 30 seconds worth.
Are these changes worthwhile?
I think with any of this, you've got to come from a position of respect and decency. And we've quoted mums before, but I'll quote my rule when I was a primary school teacher, and that was always treat people the way you would like to be treated yourself. And so come from a position of respect. I personally think it's fine to leave in words like words of women and male. I do think it's simple and easy for everybody to understand, but... and this is really important, if you're speaking to someone who identifies in a different way, then you would, of course, use the language that includes them. You would do so in a respectful and kind and considerate manner, and that you shouldn't, general rule of thumb, don't do anything to make somebody else feel bad. Correct. Especially when you're talking about cancer here. You're talking about people looking at advice on cancer who might be frightened they have cancer themselves. You want to do everything in a inclusive, but in a kind way, but also in a simple way. So I think leaving the word women, I think that's absolutely fine and important. But when you're talking to people about this issue, be kind and considerate. And I think if we were a bit less sort of, vitriolic and sort of unkind when it comes to this issue, and a bit less sensationalist and a bit more considerate, I think it would be easier for everyone.
Could I just add in as well? Some people, women or trans men or non-binary people don't have wombs or cervixes because they've had a hysterectomy.
Absolutely.
So this whole obsession about wombs and cervixes and vaginas.
Well, I'm going to come on to you.
It's just bizarre.
I'm going to come.
Yeah,
but you make an important point about the language, because that is what's used as the basis for criticising the changes that have been made. That actually, unless you spell it out very, very clearly, this is a health message for you. That's what the expert, Dr. Carleen Gribble, has said, that actually, if you make the communication less clear, women may not realise that they are being talked to about this. You're nodding your head.
Yeah, I mean, I think in a health context, surely patient safety has to come first, and people presenting themselves with issues. And I have to say, I've seen firsthand that language barrier is an issue. In my extended family, there are people who would struggle with following detailed advice. I know that happens across the board amongst friends as well. So clarity is really, really important. And inclusion is for everyone, including people who are also less literate and people who don't have English as a first language.
If you have female sex organs, often you have a period every month. You give birth. You know what a cervix is. You know what a hysterectomy is. If you're a person with female organs, this is not something that would be extraordinarily confusing to you. And I'd like to repeat again, there is no empirical evidence that's being provided here to suggest this is happening. And I really do think this is part, yet again, of this obsession with creating hypothetical situations about trans people with no actual evidence. And it's really corrosive. These people are just trying to live their lives.
This guidance has created a hypothetical situation. I think it's actually really patronising to both women and men, the idea that we need the state to dictate to us what our own identity and gender is. I just think that's a step too far.
No, but that's what's happening. If you say somebody is a woman and is a man because they have certain organs, well, then you should support that ovaries, people with ovaries and people with cervixes, because therefore you're not dictating someone's gender. Right. You're just saying what physical organs
and I just
have.
think it's non-core. I want the NHS to concentrate on spending that £12 billion extra.
It's not 12 billion. It doesn't take 12 billion to change
extra they've got from the government to clear the
Maybe that's why.
That's true. I think we can all agree. We can all agree it's not going to cost. It's not going to cost £12 billion to change the advice or change it back. But on a political point, Mo, if the Health Secretary is against the changes in advice or the way that advice is written, and the government controls the NHS in England, why is it happening?
Well, this is a good question, and I think he would say he is looking into it. There may be elements of parts of the NHS being devolved or acting on their own free will, but it will be embarrassing for him, and I think he will want to correct it quite quickly.
Oh, right. So, and he will be able to do that, do you think?
I think so. If he's as the Health Secretary, nominally in charge of the NHS, he should be able to, at least behind the scenes, have some conversations.
I would like actually us to extend this conversation into talking about general communication from government and government organisations. When Rishi Sunak was on the Treasury Select Committee yesterday, I talked to him about his announcements on the different pots of money available on the cost of living. And I said people find it really difficult to understand the different pots of money and how they relate to benefits, and whether you're on pension credit this version or whether you're on that, and what you can get and what you can't
I'm already lost.
Well, exactly. It's really confusing. So I think if we're going to have a genuine conversation rather than a sensationalist, unkind conversation, a genuine conversation about how do we ensure that messages through government organisations and the government are as clear and simple for everybody to follow, then we shouldn't just be talking about this one particular area. We should be talking about messages across government. How do we communicate that in terms of what benefits people are entitled to or not? How do we communicate that in terms of the Treasury announcement across the whole board?
All right. Well, we're going to take a pause just for a moment and welcome viewers from the BBC News Channel, because in just under 10 minutes' time we will, of course, be going into the Chamber for Prime Minister's questions. Let's take a quick look now as MPs are starting to file in. Of course, remember, this is going to be the first opportunity and the first time that Conservative MPs like Jake Berry and his colleagues will be behind the Prime Minister after he survived that vote of confidence on Monday night. It'll be intriguing and interesting to see the reaction, whether Conservative MPs, those who voted against Boris Johnson, no longer have confidence in him, sit there in silence or perhaps not even turn up, or they are acceptors, as we are starting to call Conservative MPs who voted against the Prime Minister on Monday, and they do support the Prime Minister, Boris Johnson. Let's catch up with more of that with Vicki Young, the BBC's Deputy Political Editor. Vicki, what do you think it's going to be like there in the Chamber today?
Well, remember that despite all that opposition, over 40% of Boris Johnson's own MPs saying they don't have confidence in him, it still does leave over 200 who, let's face it, will have been told in no uncertain terms to get in that chamber and cheer as loudly as they can. So they can certainly make some noise and make sure that he sounds supported. Now, I think for Sir Keir Starmer, probably the biggest challenge of the week has been deciding which bit of material to use, because I think the most damaging thing for the Prime Minister is always those devastating letters from his own side pointing out basically his failings. And so that will give Sir Keir Starmer quite a lot to go with if he chooses to go down that road. I think he wants to focus on the broad policy areas of the government. Now, yesterday, at the shadow cabinet meeting, Sir Keir Starmer said to his top team, look, we mustn't get completely distracted by what's going on inside the Conservative Party. Of course, the temptation is to sit back and watch them argue amongst themselves. But I think the top team in Labour feel that it's not going to be enough for them. They do have to come up with their own policies. They have to come up with their own agenda for government. And I think maybe that's what you'll see Sir Keir Starmer focusing on, is what are the answers that the country wants, because despite all of this, of course, about Partygate, about the Prime Minister's character, about all the problems he has, lots of people watching this will care an awful lot about what the answers the politicians have to deal with those everyday issues.
It's going to be difficult, though, isn't it, for Boris Johnson in this session to do anything like reset his leadership in any clear or triumphalist way after that vote on Monday. I mean, the options are limited. You've got Conservative MPs trying to change the rules on when they might be able to have another go at unseating Boris Johnson. Any talk of reshuffle would be extremely difficult for the Prime Minister. So his options are limited, aren't they?
Yeah, and I think the tone he adopts will be interesting, because we've seen him a couple of times since that vote. And the first one, he talked about it being, you know, a pretty good victory, actually. And I didn't think sounded like someone who was being particularly humble about all of this. There was certainly no attempt to say, I've listened, I've learned, and, you know, sort of bringing people in. Actually, at the beginning of Cabinet yesterday, the bit that our cameras were allowed into, he talked about, you know, the obsession of his opponents talking about these things. So sort of suggesting that those numerous MPs on his own side were now his opponents. So I think that's going to be interesting. How does he focus on all of this? Does he suggest that he's listening to what people have to say? I'm sure he, from his side, may want to talk about the rail strike, for example, trying to force Labour's hand on all of that. And as we know, the government is keen to reset. It's keen to come up with policies, speeches on housing, on the economy over the next couple of weeks. But as you say, that's not going to be that easy, because there will be question marks over what he can get through Parliament. The Northern Ireland Protocol being one thing that's coming down the track that certainly will exaggerate those divisions in his own party. So it won't be easy, but I think you will still hear lots of cheering from those who are still supportive of the Prime Minister.
Will you be cheering, Jake,
after the... Of course I will be, and I supported the Prime Minister. And what he has now, and what the Conservative Party has, is a chance to draw a line, move beyond it, and get back onto the front foot on policy. Because the people who vote for me in Rosendale and Darwin, as interested as they may have been in what happened in Downing Street or what happened in County Durham with Keir Starmer and Angela Rayner, what they really want their government to focus on is tackling the cost of living crisis, improving our NHS and improving their lives. And with the government's levelling up agenda, which is coming before Parliament today, the second reading of that bill, there is a real opportunity for Conservatives and the government to get behind what is a really popular agenda when you go out and talk to them.
But as you know, and you mentioned there your constituents, they were concerned about the personality and character of the Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, not just a policy solution, if you like. What will change in terms of the personality of the Prime Minister?
Well, I mean, I can't say what will change in terms of his personality, but he does have some very appealing traits. He is the person who got 14 million people to vote Conservative in this country, the biggest majority for any Conservative government this century. He is hugely appealing. I still think.
And you still think he's an electoral asset?
Once you leave the M25 and talk to real people behind real front doors in the north of England, real front doors in the north of England, I think you will find there is a wellspring of support for him, which is why I voted for him.
Right.
I still think he can help me win my seat.
Fighting talk there, Vicki. Obviously, 40% of the parliamentary party voted against Boris Johnson. Some of them have said publicly that it is time now to get on, but we have got those two by-elections coming up. That will be the next electoral test. And so the dynamic will be important over the next few weeks for the Prime Minister. In terms of the policies or the changes, the reset that you mentioned too, we talked about pressure from Tory MPs for the government to lower taxes. I mean, are they receptive to this sort of thing?
Well, I think we've had quite a lot in public, actually, about this from the government, and Rishi Sunak making it clear that he does want to cut taxes, income tax in particular, because let's face it, that's the one that everyone notices more than most others. But you don't get the impression that's coming soon. And so I think the timing of this is what's important. I don't think the Treasury want to be forced into bringing in tax cuts certainly personal tax cuts, maybe to try and paper over these problems, when actually what they think needs to be done is targeted tax cuts for businesses, because growth is what's going to be so important. We've got all sorts of predictions about the dire state of the UK economy. So the Treasury will be focused on that. But of course, it's just not as eye-catching. And so I think you have got this division as ever within the party. Of course, most Conservatives do want tax cuts, but the cost of living crisis might demand something different. So, basically handouts to people, the kind of thing we have seen, is what is on the minds of the leadership at the moment, because they feel that that does help people directly, and they've been under a lot of pressure to be seen to be doing something. But the longer term direction of the party is what is causing a lot of anxiety for many Conservative MPs.
Well, it will be, but for many voters, as we've talked about, so will the cost of living. The BBC's economics editor, we mentioned it earlier, Faisal Islam, has tweeted, UK also now forecast by OECD as well as the International Monetary Fund to have lowest growth in the developed world, both G7 and OECD members, apart from heavily sanctioned Russia. Voters, you may not be that bothered by Partygate. You will be if you just continue to get poorer.
Look, I mean, that's why I go back to my point that, it's all very well for government ministers, the Chancellor and the Prime Minister, to talk about lowering taxes and helping people. They've got to get on and do it.
Well,
that's the key message that I would put out there. And actually, I think you can see agreement between across the party that the way we deal with this cost of living crisis is to put more money in people's pockets.
You'll know Keir Starmer was criticised for focusing too much on Partygate, and he's still waiting, obviously, for the outcome of the Durham police investigation. Do you want to see him focus relentlessly on cost of living when it comes to questioning the Prime Minister?
Yeah, and the public aren't stupid, and the public can see the fact that the cost of living budget was announced the day after the Sue Gray report came out, and the public can see through what's actually going on here. Operation Save Big Dog is failing.
Let's go into the chamber.
Number one.
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, this week is Carers Week, and I'm sure the whole House will want to join me in thanking the millions of carers across the UK for all they do to support their loved ones. We've seen the vital role carers have played in our communities during the pandemic, and we all owe them a debt of gratitude. Through our reforms on adult social care, this government is committed to continuing to support carers. And Mr. Speaker, this morning I had meetings with ministerial colleagues and others. In addition to my duties in this House, I shall have further such meetings later today.
Dame Angela Riedel.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. May I associate myself with the Prime Minister's remarks about the importance of carers in our country. This week's events, Mr. Speaker, have demonstrated just how loathed this Prime Minister is. And that's only in his own party. So, as his administration is too distracted by its internal divisions to deal with the challenges we face, can the Prime Minister explain if 148 of his own backbenchers don't trust him, why on earth should the country?
Prime Minister.
I thank the Right Honourable Lady very much for her question, and I can assure her that in a long political career so far, I have, of course, picked up, barely begun, I have, of course, picked up political opponents all over the place. And that is because this government has done some very big and very remarkable things which they did not necessarily approve of. And what I want her to know is that absolutely nothing and no one, least of all her, is going to stop us with getting on for delivering
Andrew Mitchell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The whole House will unite behind the Prime Minister on his determination to hold Ukrainian war criminals to account. But is he aware that there are 5 alleged Rwandan war crimes perpetrators living freely in the UK who have been doing so now for 16 years and have neither been extradited nor put before the British courts under our existing laws? As he prepares to go down to the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting in Rwanda, will he look carefully at this issue, because it is bound to be raised with him, and will he reassure the House and the Rwandan government he takes these matters extremely seriously, and what has so far been justice massively delayed for 16 years will not be grotesquely denied?
Prime Minister.
I thank my right honourable friend for his question, and he raises an issue on which the UK has campaigned for a long time, and no country is more committed than we are to bringing war criminals to justice. I know that my right honourable friend, the Deputy Prime Minister, has raised the subject recently with the International Criminal Court. However, as he knows, and I will certainly, of course, study the case and take it up as appropriately, it is the subject of an ongoing investigation. It would not be appropriate for me to comment on it further.
We now come to the Leader of the Opposition, Keir Starmer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I couldn't make out whether that introductory noise was cheers or boos. The trouble is, I don't know whether it's directed at me or him. I joined the Prime Minister in his comments about carers. Why did his Culture Secretary, I think hiding along the bench, say that successive Conservative governments left our health service wanting and inadequate when the pandemic hit?
Mr. Speaker, everybody knows that when the pandemic hit, it was an entirely novel virus for which the whole world was unprepared. And nobody at that stage, nobody knew how to test for it. Nobody knew what the right quarantine rules should be, Mr. Speaker. But as it happened, the UK government and our amazing NHS produced, not only approved the first vaccine anywhere in the world. We were the first to get it into anybody's arms, Mr. Speaker, and we had the fastest rollout anywhere in Europe, none of which would have been possible if we'd listened to him.
I think the Prime Minister just agreed with the Culture Secretary. Perhaps she said it. They didn't deny it. Perhaps she said it because it's true.
Yeah, exactly.
It starts with GPs. People were unhappy with the service they were getting before the pandemic. Not enough GPs. Too hard to get an appointment. That's why he promised 6,000 new GPs. But his health secretary admits he won't keep that promise. Despite the hard work of doctors, people can't see a GP in person. They're unhappier than ever with GP services. If GP provision was wanting and inadequate before the pandemic, what is it now?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I'm afraid he's simply wrong, because he's wrong about what we're doing. And of course, we've got to clear the COVID backlogs, and everybody understands that. Everybody understands the pressure that the NHS is under. But they are responding magnificently, and I can tell him that thanks to the investments that this government has put in, we now have 4,300 more doctors. We have record numbers. We have record numbers in training. To the best of my, we have 11,800 more nurses this year than last year, Mr. Speaker, and 72,000 in training. And that is because of the investment that we put in, which was opposed by the party opposite. And the only reason we were able to make that investment, Mr. Speaker, is because we have a strong and robust economy, thanks to the decisions we took.
Mr. Speaker, of course he talks big, but I've got a letter here to the Prime Minister from the honourable member from Hereford and South Herefordshire. He said, this is you, Prime Minister, under you the government seems to lack a sense of mission. It has a large majority but no long-term plan. Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister's Big Plan Act is so tired that even once loyal MPs don't believe in. And it's not just waiting for a GP, it's waiting for all NHS treatment. Take cancer. For over a decade, waiting times for cancer care have been going up. His solution was supposed to be diagnostic hubs. The Health Secretary has been on a victory lap this week. But here's the rub, Prime Minister. Since they were opened last year, 135,000 extra people are now waiting for scans and tests. Can he think of a better way to describe soaring cancer waiting lists than wanting and inadequate?
Mr. Speaker, it is entirely right after the pandemic that people are now coming forward to get their cancer tests, and we have actively encouraged that, and that is the right thing for people to do. But as a result of the community diagnostic hubs that we are bringing in, 100 of them across the country, Mr. Speaker, we are able to cut the times for cancer diagnosis, help people to get their scans, their tests faster, and above all, we can do that, Mr. Speaker, because we're hiring more radiographers, we're hiring more nurses, we're hiring more professionals in our NHS because of the investments that we made, which, as I say, the party of Bevan tragically opposed.
Yes, Farmer.
Mr. Speaker, the problem is the cancer waits have been going up for 10 years, and they're even higher now. So blaming the pandemic just won't wash. Perhaps the Culture Secretary was talking about the state of NHS buildings. Before the pandemic, the NAO said they were a risk to patients. The government's response, paint jobs and fix-ups, pretending that's the same as building new hospitals. The Treasurer and the Cabinet Office apparently don't think that the refurbs are even going to be delivered. Take University Hospital North Tees. The ceiling is falling in, the roof leaks, and staff have to hose down the pipes to stop them freezing over. Failure to fix wanting and inadequate NHS buildings is putting patients at risk, isn't it, Prime Minister?
Mr. Speaker, this line of criticism is satirical, coming from a Labour government, attacking our hospital building programme, Mr. Speaker, where they were the authors of the PFI scheme that bankrupted so many hospitals. Mr. Speaker, what we're doing instead is building 48 new hospitals. Yes, we are. Thanks to the biggest capital investment programme in the history of the NHS. We put, from memory, we put £33 billion as soon as we came in, then another 92 to cope with the pandemic, plus another £39 billion in the health and care levy. They opposed that funding. They opposed the health and care levy. They don't have a leg to stand on. We're building the foundations of our NHS's, our health services' future, and they should support it.
Can I just say to both of you, you need to calm down, and there's two over here as well. The four of you could have a very nice cup of tea if you wish. Keir Starmer.
Oh dear. Prime Minister. Dear. Pretending. Mr. Speaker, pretending no rules for Prime Minister, he chunters on. Pretending no rules were broken didn't work. Pretending the economy is booming didn't work. And pretending to build 40 new hospitals won't work either. They want him to change, but he can't. As always with this Prime Minister, when he's falling short, he just changes the rules and lowers the bar. In March, he proposed changing the NHS contract. He wants to double the length of time patients can be made to wait for surgery, from 1 year to 2 years. On top of that, he scrapped zero tolerance of 12-hour waits at A&E. 24 Hours at A&E used to be a TV programme. Now it's his policy. Well, it's Health Week. And he's telling all of them.
Order! Mr. Cleverley, we've got a Tea Party gathering. I'm sure you don't want to be part of it. I will hear the question. The problem is, so do our constituents. I wonder if I were you, and I think one or two of you might be going early. What I would say is, look, I need to hear the question in the same way I expect to hear the answer. So please, Keir Starmer.
Mr. Speaker, I bet they wish they were this organised on Monday. Well, Mr. Speaker, it's Health Week, and he's telling them he's going to turn over a new leaf. So why doesn't he start by scrapping his plans to greenlight wanting and inadequate NHS standards?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, look, I've got to tell him, I just think that this line of attack is not working, Mr. Speaker. But it's not working. It's not working because they refuse to approve.
Once again, I think the two of you need to calm down. So please, we don't want to see an empty front bench, Prime Minister.
Look, we've not only raised the standards in the NHS, we're not only reducing waiting times for those who have had to wait the longest, Mr. Speaker, but what we're doing more fundamentally is doing what the people of this country can see is simple common sense, and that is using our economic strength to invest in doctors and nurses and get people on the wards, get people, giving people their scans and their screens and their tests in a more timely manner and getting and taking our NHS forward. We are on target, Mr. Speaker, thanks to this government, to recruit 50,000 more nurses. Thanks to the investments, I've just got to repeat this because he doesn't seem to have heard it so far, thanks to the investments that party opposed. Perhaps he can now explain why they opposed them.
Keir Starmer.
Mr. Speaker, raising taxes because you failed to grow the economy isn't a plan for the NHS, and everyone sitting behind him knows it. Members of his cabinet admit that Conservatives left our health system wanting and inadequate when the pandemic hit. He's been in power for 3 years, and things are getting worse, not better. Fewer GPs, more waits for cancer tests, buildings still crumbling, and he's changing the rules to cover up his failure. And there is a real human pain as a result. Today I spoke to Hamza Semakula. Hamza is 20 and he plays semi-professional football for Hendon. He tore his ACL earlier this year. Because of the 2-year wait for surgery, he had to crowdfund for a private operation. I also spoke to Akshay Patel. Last year, his mother woke up unable to breathe. Akshay called 999 6 times. In his last call, he said, "I rang an hour ago for an ambulance as she had difficulty breathing, and now she's dead." Even he must admit that Akshay, Bina and Hamza deserve better than a wanting and inadequate government utterly unable to improve our NHS.
Mr. Speaker, I think everybody in the House has sympathy with Akshay and the other constituents and their families and the other constituents that he mentions, Mr. Speaker, and I share their feelings. But when you look at what this government is doing, the massive, and I must say this to him, we are making colossal investments in our NHS. We are cutting waiting times, we're raising standards, we're paying nurses more, we're supporting our fantastic NHS. And by the way, he continually came to this, I just remind him of this, and said that we had the worst COVID record in Europe. Turned out to be completely untrue. He still hasn't retracted it. we're doing it, Mr. Speaker. We can make those investments because of the strength of the UK economy, because of the fiscal firepower that we have to deploy. We have the lowest unemployment now since 1974, and we are going to continue to grow our economy for the long term. He asked about the mission of this government, Mr. Speaker. It is to unite and level up across our whole country, to unleash the potential of our entire country. The biggest tutoring programme in history for young people, raising literacy and numeracy standards for 11-year-olds from 65% adequacy to our 90%. That is the highest objective I think a government could achieve. Expanding home ownership for millions of people, as my right honourable friend for Duluth and I will do, for millions of people who currently don't have it. Cutting the costs of business to make this the enterprise centre of Europe. That is our vision. Creating high-wage, high-skilled jobs for this country. And as for jobs, I'm going to get on with mine, and I hope he gets on with his.
But I didn't know you were so popular. Come on.
Well,
we love all of us.
Changing the subject completely, in North East Hertfordshire, we're very concerned about sewage overflows into our precious chalk streams. And this is damaging to the flora and fauna and also restricts the use of these precious streams for leisure. The Environment Bill included some important measures last year, and I welcome the fact that the government has consulted on its reduction plan for storm overflows. But when would we expect to see some meaningful improvements and some real reductions in the amount of sewage going into our rivers?
Minister.
Yeah, well, I thank you very much, and I share his concern. I can tell him our sewage plan is the biggest investment on this by any government. We made it clear that the water companies must do more, Mr. Speaker, and actually we already are seeing improvements, but the regulator is ensuring that the water companies do more to deliver on their obligations. We will not hesitate to take further action as needed.
We now come to the leader of the SNP, Ian Blackford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I associate myself with the remarks of the Prime Minister and the Leader of the Opposition in supporting our carers? Mr. Speaker, week after week, I've called on this Prime Minister to resign. I've been met with a wall of noise from the Tory benches. I thought they were trying to shout me down, but all this time... But all this time, Mr. Speaker, it turns out that 41% of them have been cheering me on. Because, Mr. Speaker, let's be clear, at least the numbers don't lie. 41% of his own MPs have no confidence in him. 66 of MPs across the House don't support him, and 97% of Scottish MPs want the Minister for the Union shown the door. We now have a lame duck Prime Minister presiding over a divided party in a disunited kingdom. So, how does the Prime Minister expect to continue when even unionist leaders in Scotland won't back him?
Prime Minister.
I want to thank the right honourable gentleman for his characteristic warm words. And actually, Mr. Speaker, I want to say that the biggest and most powerful and effective advocate of the United Kingdom over the last time that I've been in has been that man there. I don't know how long he's going to last here as leader of the SNP, the Scottish National Congress. Long may he rest in place, Mr. Speaker. He is the erudite that's keeping our kingdom together. I thank him for what he's doing.
Blackford.
Well, I can say to the Prime Minister... I can say to the Prime Minister that I'll be standing shoulder to shoulder with our First Minister as we take our country to independence. Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister is acting like Monty Python's Black Knight, running around declaring it's just a flesh wound. And no amount of delusion and denial will save the Prime Minister from the truth. This story won't go away until he goes away. For once in his life, he needs to wake up to reality. Prime Minister, it's over. It's done. The Prime Minister has no options left, but Scotland does. Scotland has the choice of an independent future. Because it's not just the Prime Minister that we have zero confidence in. It's the broken Westminster system that puts a man like him in power. Can he tell us, can the Prime Minister tell us how it is democratic that Scotland is stuck with a Prime Minister we don't trust, a Conservative Party we don't support, and Tory governments we haven't voted for since 1955?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we had a referendum, as I've told the House before, in 2014. I think he should respect the mandate of the people. And he keeps saying that he wants his independence for his country. Our country is independent, Mr. Speaker. Our country is independent. He tried 48 times to reverse it, the leader of the opposition. And the only way that independence would ever be reversed is if we had the disaster, Mr. Speaker, of a Labour SNP coalition to take us back into the EU.
Esther McVey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Earlier this week, the Prime Minister said, you cannot spend your way out of inflation, you cannot tax your way into growth. We will cut the cost of government. Here, I completely agree. So can I suggest a strong start that he scraps the inflated white elephant that is HS2, saving the government tens of billions of pounds from a budget that is spiralling out of control?
Prime Minister.
I thank my right honourable friend. In case you missed what else I said, we're cutting taxes, Mr. Speaker, for everybody who pays national insurance contributions by an average of £330, Mr. Speaker, just next month. And as for HS2, actually what it will do is deliver long-term growth and prosperity for the whole of the country, uniting and levelling up, deliver more revenues and put us in a better position to cut taxes in the future.
Colin Eastwood.
Speaker, today we hear reports that the Prime Minister refused to consult the First Treasury Council on his plans to rip up the protocol. Now, I know this question might be a bit redundant, given he might not be around very much longer. But given the Prime Minister's casual record of casual law breaking, will he give a commitment to the people of Northern Ireland that he will not break international law anytime soon?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I can tell him that the reports that he's seen this morning are not correct. And what I can also tell him is that the most important commitment that I think everybody in this House has made is to the balance and symmetry of the Belfast Good Friday Agreement. That is our highest legal international priority, and that is what we must deliver.
Dr. James Davis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The North Wales Mainline Railway has seen little investment for over a century. In practice, this means that jobs at Manchester Airport are poorly accessible to many of my constituents with a 2-hour commute, whereas a similar journey in the southeast of the country would be just 45 minutes. So will my right honourable friend ensure that the North Wales line features within the updated rail network enhancements pipeline at the decision to develop stage?
Yes. I thank my honourable friend. Listen, I'm a great enthusiast, Mr. Speaker, for this project. We are looking at it, and I can tell him that the Network Rail has received funding to carry out feasibility work on improving North Wales mainline journey times, and travellers in North Wales could have no more effective advocate than my honourable friend.
Kim Ledbeach.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Despite the Prime Minister's promises of new hospitals and more doctors and nurses, the Bronte Birth Centre at my local hospital in Batley-on-Spen is temporarily shut and is at risk of permanent closure due to staff shortages and lack of resources. The reality on the ground is that after 12 years of Conservative mismanagement, the NHS is broken. So can the Prime Minister explain to expectant parents in my constituency why, despite his promises, they are now forced to travel miles to give birth, and why his government voted against an effective long-term workforce plan for the NHS, proposed by his right honourable friend, the member for South West Surrey.
Prime Minister.
I thank her very much, and I will certainly look into what's the centre that she mentions in Batley and Spen. What I can tell her, though, is that across the country we are investing massively in staff, in premises, in technology, in diagnostic centres, and I'm afraid for the party opposite to carp and to criticise is frankly absurd, because they voted against the health and care levy that is putting billions into our NHS, and they need to sort out their position. Either they support it or they don't.
Hold on.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would my right honourable friend join me in complimenting Bradford on becoming the City of Culture in 2025? Could he also praise the team from Durham, who gave a fantastic representation of what County Durham had to offer? Bradford must really be extraordinary to have beaten us. In 2025, Durham will also celebrate the bicentennial of the Stockton to Darlington Passenger Railway, which will of course distract people from Bradford. I believe that my right honourable friend is the best person to lead on delivering levelling up for the North East. And to that end, can he encourage progress on the Furry Hill Station development, reinvigorate the Leamside line, and help deliver a great county deal for County Durham?
I thank my honourable friend, and he and I have campaigned on it. I've been following his campaign on this for a long time, Mr. Speaker. I'm told that the Department of Transport is currently reviewing the business case for exactly what he has just requested. We're putting the funding in, Mr. Speaker, unlike anything the party opposite ever could have delivered.
Richard Thompson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In Monday's confidence vote, the Prime Minister secured the support of just 2 out of Scotland's 59 MPs. That means out of the massed ranks of his Scottish Conservative colleagues, he got as much support as there are pandas in Edinburgh Zoo. The Prime Minister is an intelligent man. He must know that position's untenable. And if he's not going to do the decent thing and resign as the Prime Minister, surely it's past time he wrote a letter of resignation to himself to stand down as the Minister for the Union.
Prime Minister.
I thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I really redirect the honourable gentleman to what I said to the right honourable gentleman, my friend, the leader of the SNP, because I think the more they campaign in the current circumstances for breaking up our United Kingdom with all the strength and all the merits that it has, I think the more damage they do to their own case.
Greg Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Supporting adults with a variety of mental health challenges, learning disabilities and conditions such as dementia. Last week, the Prince's Centre in Prince's Risborough in my constituency celebrated 10 years as an independent daycare provider. From my recent visit, it is quite clear what a happy, welcoming and supportive atmosphere has been created for all service users. So will my right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, join me in thanking and congratulating the manager, Kim Challoner, her whole team of staff, volunteers and trustees for delivering this first-class service? And as Chequers is but a hop, skip and a jump from Prince's Risborough, will he deliver those congratulations in person?
Prime Minister.
Well, I thank my honourable friend, who's amongst his many other distinctions, I think my MP. I also join him in thanking the entire team at the Prince's Centre for everything that they do, and I will certainly keep his kind invitation in mind.
Abdul Khan.
Mr. Speaker, I'd have more sympathy for the words get on with the job if it actually started in the first place. 2 weeks ago, the Prime Minister told the House, to the best of my knowledge, everybody is getting their passport within 4 to 6 weeks. However, the Passport Office is currently quoting a 10-week service time, with many of my constituents waiting well over that period. Cancelled summer trips could cost families over £1 billion. Does the Prime Minister accept that the Passport Office backlog is placing additional pressure on families already struggling with the cost of living crisis.
Actually, Mr. Speaker, what we're doing is 91% are getting their passport within 6 weeks, I can tell him, Mr. Speaker. And we are putting hundreds and hundreds more staff into the passport office. And the strength of demand, by the way, is a sign of the robustness of the economy, because everybody is frankly wanting to go on holiday, and quite right too, Mr. Speaker. But when it comes to travel chaos, have we heard any condemnation yet from the opposition, from the RMT and their reckless and wanton strike? What about that?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As my right honourable friend knows, Rochester Strood is facing unrealistic housing targets, putting pressure on the council to bring forward a local plan that would close successful working docks and the loss of beloved open spaces such as Deangate Ridge, all in the name of meeting an arbitrary target. Can my right honourable friend assure my constituents who are facing this level of overdevelopment that there will be greater flexibility on housing numbers so that the council can produce a local plan that delivers the appropriate housing but protects important sites like these?
Prime Minister. I thank my honourable friend, and she speaks, I know, for colleagues up and down the country. We want to make sure that councils are able to build in the right place and sensitively to local needs, and that is what we insist on. But I just want to make it one thing absolutely clear. Part of the merit, genius of levelling up, Mr. Speaker, is that it will encourage us to take some of the pressure, some of the heat out of the southeast of England, which has been overburdened for decades, and we can do it.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My constituent Mark is trying to sponsor 2 sisters from Ukraine to come to the UK. These 2 sisters were housed in dangerous temporary accommodation in Montenegro for several weeks, while the UK Home Office refused to process the application of the youngest sister because she's 13 and travelling without her parents, even though she had her 18-year-old sister with her. The 18-year-old sister is now in London, and the 13-year-old sister has been sent back to her hometown in Ukraine, which is under siege. Can I ask the Prime Minister, can he tell me, hand on heart, does he think sending vulnerable children back to a war zone is the right policy?
Prime Minister. Well, Mr. Speaker, of course I understand her indignation about the case that she mentions, and I know that my right honourable friend, the Home Secretary, will be looking into it. But I have to say, I do think the record of this country in processing so far, I think well over 120,000 visas for Ukrainians is very creditable. I thank all the staff who've been involved in that effort.
Mr. Speaker, my right friend will remember that in March I asked him about increased research funding for aortic dissection as called for by the Aortic Dissection Charitable Trust. Will the Prime Minister update me on the progress with this? Will he also recognise the immense value of the patient awareness videos that have been produced by TADCT featuring Whispering Bob Harris, survivors, relatives of patients, to help those going through this awful condition for the first time?
Prime Minister. Well, I thank my honourable friend for her fantastic work on this, and I know the personal circumstances that give her understanding of this campaign. I can tell her that the National Institute for Health Research is looking at what more we can do to support research on aortic dissection. I know that she's meeting my right honourable friend, the Health Secretary, shortly.
We'll leave PMQs at this point. If anything develops, we will, of course, bring it to you as soon as we can. That was almost the end of the first Prime Minister's Questions session for Boris Johnson, facing Keir Starmer, but also wondering what's going on behind him from his own MPs since that confidence vote on Monday night, where over 40% of the parliamentary party, mainly backbench MPs, not those on the government's payroll, voted against him and said they didn't have confidence in him. Let's introduce our guests for this part of the programme. For the Government, Home Office Minister Rachel Maclean, and sitting next to her, Bridget Phillipson, Shadow Education Secretary, and sitting next to me, Vicki Young, the BBC's Deputy Political Editor. Let's just start, because you said before Prime Minister's questions that he was spoilt for choice, Keir Starmer, in terms of the material that he could go on. Many people, probably including his own Labour MPs, might have expected him to exploit Boris Johnson's precarious position following Monday night. He didn't do it. Why?
I think this goes to the fundamental question of what is Prime Minister's questions for, actually. So if it's theatre and if it's coming up with clips and making your own side cheer and lifting their morale, then I suppose then that's when you go for it, don't you? And you pick through the material and the discomfort and kick the Prime Minister while he's down. And actually, it was a very interesting choice today by the Labour leader, because he decided to talk about an issue that is of huge interest to, you could argue, millions of people. Whether you call an ambulance and it turns up in time to save your dying relative, whether you get your cancer diagnostic treatment, whether you have to sit in an A&E for 24 hours. So he has gone for detailed questions about a policy area which is of huge importance to people, and you could argue that the government is in a bit of trouble on. Now, that hasn't satisfied lots of people. It didn't make his own side cheer, particularly, and I think some will say it let Boris Johnson off the hook. But you can see why Labour would argue that that is the reason that they've done it. But people will be saying you've missed an open goal. He's got 40% of his own MPs not behind him. And, of course, they didn't get up, any of his own MPs, and have a go at him either. So, actually, he got a pretty easy time. He sailed through it. And some would say Boris Johnson did a better job today than the Leader of the Opposition.
Well, is that the case, Bridget Phillipson? Wasn't this the opportunity for Keir Starmer to, in effect, put the boot in to Boris Johnson, to a Prime Minister that you would like to see go and resign? And you had a confidence vote where a huge number of his own side agreed with you and said exactly the same. There was nothing from Keir Starmer today.
It's just a matter of time before the Prime Minister goes. I mean, it really is. So the public have made their mind up. They know what he's about. They know what he's done. But what the public also raise is that the fact that the NHS is in a terrible state. We've had consecutive Conservative governments now for 12 years. I mean, even the Culture Secretary herself admitted that the NHS was left wanting going into the pandemic. They can't hide from that record. I think it's right that we give voice to what people are telling us. I speak to people who are waiting months and months on end, left in pain, waiting for hip replacements, knee replacements, young people who can't get the mental health support that they need, people ringing up every morning trying to get a GP appointment and they can't. I mean, you know, that is incredibly serious. It's what people care about. We're right to raise it. But this is what 12 years of Conservative government gets you.
Right, well, let's talk about the state of the health service, because the government and Boris Johnson today, Rachel Maclean, saying that we're building the foundations of the health service after the pandemic. But in fact, the ammunition came from your own side. Bridget Phillipson mentioned the Culture Secretary, Nadine Dorries. She tweeted a few days ago, your pandemic preparation, this is into response to Jeremy Hunt, the former Health Secretary, during 6 years as Health Secretary, was found wanting and inadequate. Well, she has exposed the government's lack of investment and focus on the NHS service. She's admitted it. It was found wanting, inadequate before the pandemic. What do you say?
Well, I think we've obviously faced a global pandemic. And
but this is before. This is before the pandemic.
Yes, but every single country around the world has faced a similar unprecedented challenge. And I think, actually, if you look at the government's record, on the whole, in the round, we have got an extremely good record when you take into account our response in terms of the vaccine, the investment that we put into the health service to keep people safe. So actually what you have to look at is what the government has delivered and how it has helped people.
Wasn't Nadine Dorries right or wrong about Jeremy Hunt, the former Health Secretary?
Well, I would prefer to focus on our record of delivery. And actually, if I talk about my own constituency, we have got a hospital that is receiving significant investment because of this Prime Minister. We're having a multi-million-pound extension built at the Alex Hospital in Redditch as a direct result of this Prime Minister. And that's why I'm very happy to support him.
Right, well, let's look at the delivery again, but let's start with this Nadine Dorries tweet. This is the Culture Secretary, a member of the Cabinet of the government. You want to talk about delivery, we will talk about it in just a moment. But on this, your pandemic preparation, Jeremy Hunt, during 6 years as Health Secretary, was found wanting and inadequate. Was she right or wrong?
Well, I understand why you want to get into this direct sort of personality
No, this is
clash,
her assessment
but
of the health service.
I am not a health minister. She knows a lot more about it than I do. I think probably every single government will be learning lessons of pandemic preparedness.
Right.
We are working with the WHO, other international organisations. Of course, it's right that we learn lessons. She will have her own personal experience of that as a health minister. But we do have to look, I think, on the round. What people care about is, did we protect them through the pandemic? Did we get them vaccinated? Did we keep them safe? And did we overall have a good record of protecting our people through this pandemic, which I would argue we did.
Right. Well, you say that the UK did, the government did have good preparedness. Now we are coming out of the pandemic and you're saying the government has taken the right steps, put in the correct levels of investment. Let's just have a look at this from an inpatient A&E waiting for treatment in Harlow. Let's just have a listen to what the nurse says.
We've currently got 170 patients in the department. That's 170, quite a few. There are 90 patients waiting to be seen at the moment. That's 90 of you are still waiting to be seen. Our current wait time for a doctor is 7.5 hours. I will estimate that by the time I go home in the morning at 8 o'clock, some of you will still be here waiting for a doctor, because the wait will get up to 12 or 13 hours. I will expect that. There are currently no beds in the trust. We're trying to make some space as we can, but if people are admitted, there is a chance they might stay in A&E for the night. So we will make you comfortable, we will do our best, we will look after you, but please don't expect that you'll be going straight to a ward, because that may not happen.
How did you feel when you watched that, Rachel?
Of course, our heart goes out to anybody in that situation. And we've had our own pressures in our own trusts, and I've been working really closely, so I have a good knowledge of what's happened. But let's be clear, there was not some magic, wonderful situation when Labour were in charge.
It was a lot better, I can tell you.
It's always under pressure. A&E is under pressure, and that's why the government has made investments to ease the situation. If you sort of refer back to the Prime Minister when he was answering the points, he rightly pointed to the investment that we have put in to recruit additional doctors and nurses. Don't forget, demand is always going up. We are still dealing with the pandemic backlogs. We do need to address those waiting times, and we will.
Right, this is an unprecedented situation. Rachel McLean is absolutely right. She's also right that unprecedented levels of investment have been committed by this government, some of it in the form of that national insurance rise to pay for post-pandemic recovery, something Labour said shouldn't happen.
We don't believe that the government should be putting up taxes in the middle of a cost of living crisis.
How are you going to fund it then?
Absolutely not. Over the last Labour government, we inherited a situation just like the one we've seen there in 1997. That was typical, that was standard. It's what we're seeing right across every A&E department in every part of England. We see similar situations in GP surgeries, similar waits when it comes to mental health. In government, we fixed that, we sorted it. It's all very good and well to say your heart goes out to people. Well, that's not going to sort the problem. It's the job of government to fix it. We fixed it. More nurses, more doctors, new hospitals, investment in diagnostics, people not waiting years on end, left in pain, left with debilitating conditions. You know, the cancer waits that we see, you know, it will again fall, I'm afraid, to the next Labour government to sort out the mess her government's going to leave us.
Rachel?
Well, I think Bridget is painting rather a rosy and quite inaccurate picture. And I know, obviously, living in this country all this time, bringing up my children, of course, I have experienced waiting times under a Labour government, and anybody in the country can tell you that there was not a magical, rosy picture under the last Labour government. The NHS needs investment. We have put that investment into it. The Labour Party voted against all the investment proposals. So what is their solution to
investment in the NHS over the last 12 years has been below historic averages.
Just let me finish.
What is their
solution
let Rachel finish
to fix the problems in the NHS if they are voting against the billions of pounds of funding that we're putting in?
Well,
They're voting against the doctors
people
and
will
nurses.
not understand.
They are voting against the tax rises. There is no other source of money to fix these problems that the Labour Party have identified.
There is an endless supply of money, as we saw during the pandemic, for dodgy PPE, for contracts that failed to deliver, for the friends and donors of the Conservative Party. There was when it came to these dodgy contracts that didn't deliver.
But why are you voting, and why have you voted against a rise that's going to pay for investment in the NHS?
Because we think it's the wrong thing for the government to be putting up taxes on working people in the middle of a cost of living crisis.
To pay for the improvements that you've just talked about?
Yes, there's no guarantee any of that's ever going to happen. there is no plan to back any of this up. So taxes will go up. People will see no material improvement in what they will expect in the NHS because there is no plan to do it.
Right. Well,
as with all of these things, I mean, you know, we've heard from opponents of the Prime Minister recently that they believe that too. There is no long-term plan. The government have no vision for the change that they want to see in our country. They're getting by day to day. It's all about sustaining the Prime Minister, not about making sure that people don't have to wait for 12 hours in A&E.
Right, let's just talk about one aspect of delivery, Rachel McLean, because it's about hospitals. Boris Johnson repeated, in fact, what he has said in the past and what was stated in the 2019 Conservative manifesto. We will build and fund 40 new hospitals over the next 10 years by 2030. How many hospitals have been built so far? Do you know?
So that plan is on track.
Is it?
Yes, it is, because it's a long-term plan, as you've rightly said. And I would just take issue with Bridget's point. She knows very well there is a long-term plan because we do work with NHS England and all the delivery bodies to make sure that we set out the funding, the considerable investments. Hospitals are not built overnight, as everybody knows. I've seen that investment in my own hospital in Redditch. That's coming on stream. I've worked very closely with my local trust to get behind the details of that. That plan is on track. We will deliver those hospitals by 2030. It's going to take a number of parliaments to do so, but we stand behind our plans. Right. We funded them, we set out how we're going to deliver them, and we have already started to work through the plans to bring them on stream.
Right. The analysis by BBC Reality Check and the Nuffield Trust says that of the 40 hospitals, only three are entirely new hospitals. The others are rebuilds. The Health Service Journal says only 6 have been started. Yes, we're in 2022 and there's some years to go, and only 1 stands any chance of being completed by the original target date of 2025. Are you sure you're on track?
I don't recognise those figures. And
from the Health Service Journal, from the Nuffield Trust and the BBC Reality Check that says that only 3 are entirely new hospitals?
Well, I think you've highlighted yourself that we have got hospitals that we've already started. We are on track, as I said. It's a long-term plan. It goes all the way out to 2030. Of course, we are laying the foundations. That investment needs to come on stream. Anybody who's involved in a hospital building programme, as actually I have been locally, knows that these things don't happen overnight. There is a huge amount of work to go through. That work is going on now. We need to carry on with that, and that's why we need to put that funding in that the Labour Party has consistently voted against.
It's just
Bridget
another lie. It's just another lie. They can't help themselves.
What's your plan? Bridget isn't going to get 40 hospitals built overnight.
There are no 40 hospitals. The 40 hospitals don't exist. We've just heard that. There are no 40 hospitals. Where are these, mythical 40 hospitals? It's just another lie for a Prime Minister who can't help himself.
Vicki, your reflections?
48 hospitals actually is what the Prime Minister said.
Another 8, yeah.
And delivery is a real issue, I think, for the government. Now, I think lots of people will say, look, of course, the pandemic meant that a lot of these plans were thrown off course, and there will be some understanding around that. But I think this is the real challenge for the Prime Minister over the next 2 years, if he survives in the job. And that's what a lot of his MPs are looking for, and a lot of voters will be looking for, is actual delivery on some of these things. And when it comes to the NHS, there are some in the Conservative Party, certainly, who are talking about the amount of money going in and actually whether it is being well enough spent. And they would say it's not just about money, it's about other things as well. It's about IT, it's about, again, better delivery, better technology, better use of data and all of that. And I think there's an interesting point around targets as well. Part of the reason that the last Labour government was able to improve some of those waiting times was by bringing in targets to focus people's minds. So I think the biggest question, though, is going to be about, is the money being well spent, and are the new plans that the government's going to come up with, are they actually going to deliver for people anytime soon?
Let's talk about the broader economy. The BBC's economics editor, Faisal Islam, we showed his tweet just before PMQs, but let me show it again. UK also now forecast by OECD as well as IMF to have the lowest growth in the developed world apart from heavily sanctioned Russia. And yet, at the same time, a stagnation in growth forecast next year for UK economy. UK also forecast in 2023 by OECD economy to have highest inflation at 7.4% of all the G7 and also all the G20, apart from the currency crisis countries, Argentina, Turkey and Russia. Stagflation. Before PMQs, your colleague Rachel McLean, Jake Berry, Conservative MP, said it was because of the high levels of taxes. He made a correlation between high levels of taxes and low growth. Is he right?
I think that Jake has got a really good point there, particularly when you look at business taxes, because actually to get an economy growing, you have to invest in productivity and you have to invest in jobs, skills and infrastructure. And of course we want to incentivise that. So I think that the broad package of interventions that the Chancellor is looking at is going to very much help us with that. We are facing some difficult times. We all know that.
But he's been pushing taxes up. So do you agree with Jake Berry that it is the government's own policy of putting up taxes that has caused low rates of growth?
I'm not... Look, I didn't see what Jake said, so
Well, that is what he said. I take it from me.
OK, so, I mean, look, I would agree that as a Conservative government, we want to get taxes down. And in fact, what we're doing, the way that we are reducing taxes is in a very targeted way towards those on low incomes, and we are reducing taxes across the board for those lower earners, and I think that's the right thing to do. But we do also need to set out how we are going to cut taxes on everybody, on working people, which we have done to a large extent, and also on businesses. So that's where we need to get to, because we need to invest in that productivity, that wealth creation, and that's how we're going to drive prosperity for everybody in the country.
Are you going to reverse the increases in national insurance contributions if you were to come into government?
We'll see what we inherit closer to the election. I'm not going to set out all of Labour's tax policy.
Because you probably won't reverse it, will you?
Well, I'm not going to set out ahead of time what our tax policy will be.
But you've made such a stand against them being put up, Bridget.
Well, we wouldn't have done it. Absolutely, we would not have done it. We're the only major economy to be putting up taxes on working people in the middle of a cost of living crisis coming out of this terrible global pandemic that we've faced. But we do see the figures around growth. We're on course to have the worst growth of any G20 country except Russia. But that's not just this year. It's not just about the pandemic. We've had 12 years of a failure on growth, and that's meant we've had less money to invest in our public services. It's also the reason the Chancellor is driven again and again to putting up taxes, because the government's record on growth is so poor.
But it is easy for opposition parties, isn't it, to conduct their economic and finance policy when they're not in government, and then do what you've just done and not say what you would do if you were in government. And you won't actually say we would reverse those increases in taxes on NICs that we have stood against and voted against, but you won't pledge to reverse it.
We'll set out in serious detail for the manifesto what our tax policy will be. But in terms of the direction we would take and how we would be doing things differently right now, we need a much fairer tax system, one that doesn't always load that taxation onto working people and their families. That's what we've seen time and again from the government.
All right.
We would also, for example, be overhauling the business rate system, which disincentivises investment, which makes it harder for many of our high street firms to be competitive. And we would fund that through a levy on those online giants. So we have set out how we would be doing things differently. But no, I'm not able to say to you every line of that manifesto, every aspect of our tax policy, but we would do things fairly. The current system that we've got means that working people right now, with all of the price rises that they're facing, are seeing their taxes go up. It's no good the government saying they're a low-tax government.
All right, you don't want to do it line by line, but as a broad principle, would you say that the overall tax burden under a Labour government will be lower than the Conservative government now in place?
I think we would be taxing much more fairly right across the economy.
But that's not the question I'm asking. Fairly, of course, we can all interpret what fairly means. Would it be lower?
I think fairness is the core point, as opposed to the quantum, because if you look at the changes that we've seen right across the taxation system over the last 12 years, it means that working people are being expected to pay more and get less. And that means that those with the broader shoulders haven't been making the contribution that they should, which is why we're in the position now that in the middle of this cost of living crisis, more and more people are paying more and more tax. And it's not just the national insurance, it's the income tax thresholds that have been frozen again. That's pulling more people into paying more tax.
Although, of course, next month those NIC thresholds will be increased, so more people will be taken out of paying national insurance contributions.
Having put it up in the first place.
Let me ask you about something else, because having asked Rachel Maclean about Jake Berry's comments on taxation, your colleague Emma Hardy was sat where you are, saying that she supports the strikes that are proposed by the RMT, the rail strikes that could cause huge disruption. Do you agree with her?
I don't want the strikes to go ahead.
No, she supports them.
OK, I didn't say what Emma said, but I would rather the strikes didn't go ahead. I would like Network Rail, the government and the operators to get around the table and sort it out. I don't think anybody would want to see that kind of disruption. But there is a leadership role as well for ministers in this, rather than kind of stoking that tension and making quite inflammatory comments. A Labour government will be trying to get people around the table to sort it out. I think that's what people expect of their government.
But you wouldn't support the strikes in principle?
Well, I hope they don't go ahead. I hope it's not necessary, because if strikes are, strikes represent a failure to get an agreement, we'd rather an agreement could be reached.
Is that constructive language to be using against the unions, that they are extremely selfish and irresponsible and not behaving like grown-up adults, which is what Sajid Javid and Number 10 have said?
I think it's a fair point, because the unions and the government and the industry do need to get round the table, and a huge amount of work has gone on. But don't forget, this industry needs to change with the times. The government has stood behind the rail industry throughout the pandemic when trains were running with hardly anybody on them. The amount of investment gone into the railways is, I don't have the exact figures, but it is something like £600 for every single family around the country, whether or not they travel by train. So, of course, we have to look at the future of the rail industry. I used to be a transport minister. I've got some knowledge of some of these challenges, but it is now incumbent on the industry to work with those unions. But I do think it is quite interesting on the politics of this that Keir Starmer has not been able to stand up and condemn the strikes, nor has the Mayor of London, and we have seen quite a lot of Labour MPs actually backing them. Really, that's pretty much against what working people need. They need to be able to go to work and travel by train, and strikes are directly against the interests.
What about bringing in legislation to make sure that trains still run?
Well, this is an industry that runs the trains, and of course we have seen throughout the pandemic, due to the support of the government, this is not about legislation, it's about an economic model, it's about a business model for the railways. We stood behind the railways, we've played our part. Now we need the railways and actually the unions to get round the table and work this out. I think some of the increases that they're asking for are really quite unrealistic, to be fair. We are in an inflationary situation, but it's working people that will suffer here.
On that, I'm going to say thank you to all of our guests before and just now in the studio. I will be back tomorrow with Politics Live at 12:15. From all of us here, bye-bye.